Well, quite a situation there when I bring you our first feature on the show today. Ahead of the commencement of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which is to take place in January 2021, the federal government has already ratified the membership of Nigeria as the December deadline draws near. The decision was taken at the just concluded weekly meeting of the Federal Executive Council, supervised by President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, the Intra-African Trade Agreement was earlier created by the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement among 54 out of the 55 African Union nations to create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business persons as well as investments, and also pave the way for accelerating the establishment of the customs union. Well, joining me now in our Lagos studio to discuss this development and much more, I have Baba Yusuf, the founder of Global Investment and Trade Company. Good to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me, David.
Now, looking at the major thrust of the AfCFTA, that's the single continental market for goods, investment, services, as well as free movement of people and investments within the African region along our different corridors, meeting the December 5th deadline, beating even the date. What does this mean for Nigeria? What does this mean in terms of our body language and response to this trade agreement?
Well, I think it's a reality we have to face. The Africa Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Agreement is part of the evolution, of the next phase of growth, global growth, and for Africa as well. So it's a welcome development considering the benefits creating the largest trade market in the world. Have been given access to 1.2 billion people, having a collective GDP of about $2.5 trillion. So this is a platform that is a must for us to move to the next level as a continent, as a people. Now, talking about meeting the deadline for us having ratified, for the takeoff for 2021, I think there are the baby steps that have to take place before then. Fine-tuning the protocols and signing the multilateral agreements, and then the sensitization that will take place for our traders and investors in the market. I think that should be the first steps. Yeah, and while that is going on, I hope and I pray the institutions or bodies that are responsible for ensuring the success of Nigeria's participation and reining in the full benefits of the AfCFTA are able to come out. I hope by now there's a strategic document and a roadmap for us to achieve those objectives. Of course, it's more or less for the mid to long term, if you like, but I think the baby steps can be taken care of between now and the end of this year.
And talking about improving our regional integration, now we also have to take a look at the macroeconomic indices that we see fueling all of the different individual countries at this point in time in terms of monetary and fiscal stimulus. How do we integrate all of these to have some level of trade policy coherence? Now, earlier on, listening to the report from Lara in Abuja there, we have certain issues along the regional lines. Little cracks here and there. Traders in Ghana have issues with those in Nigeria as well. And you heard the call. It's not necessarily one of the best pictures that we have ahead of the implementation of the AfCFTA. So now some are also calling that to have a stronger implementation of this trade area agreement, now we would need national ministries responsible for trade to also develop committees that would solely focus on the AfCFTA. Do you think this would address some of these issues?
Yes and no. First of all, some of these issues are deeply rooted. Some are political, some are economic, international. We just heard, what is happening in Ghana, which has been, in the burner for a long time. For traders that have been applying their trade in francophone countries, they will also tell you the challenges they have been facing, and then on and on across the continent. So yes, these are deeply rooted issues that possibly a single focal point, committee may not be able to resolve. There is need for a holistic approach. ECOWAS and AU need to look at these deeply rooted issues. And also countries, individual countries, for example, Nigeria, need to look at its overall foreign policy and international trade policy vis-a-vis its citizens and how they operate. And then coming back to the AfCFTA, for instance, how do we key into the benefits? For example, in terms of preparation, our infrastructure, state of infrastructure in the country, competitiveness in terms of power, in terms of what you call the economic platforms, are they ready? Value addition, processing for us to have products that can be competitive within the African market. Don't forget you have within this market the Kenyans, the Ghanaians, and the South Africans that have gone a little bit ahead of us in terms of value addition and processing in the international market. So the preparedness, domestically for Nigeria is very critical. This committee, yes, we need to have a focal point, whether it is a committee or it is a council, whatever it is. The important thing is that there must be a holistic approach, an overarching strategy to achieving this objective, and importantly, reining in these benefits, for Nigeria and then consequently for Africa.
Now, trying to improve on our trade volume that, as we see now, as individual entities and also as a collective front now, we take a look at the fact that one of the realities on ground is that we have a less or not so competitive manufacturing and industrial sector. That raises one of the major red flags, and then we also look at potential tax leaks as well, looking at import duty, income tax here and there. Our borders still remain shut as well. How do you think all of these issues would interface and then go against, likely, the whole thrust of the agenda of the AfCFTA?
I believe having ratified this, Mr. President and his team have that very much in mind, that moving forward the strategy has to change. Of course, in terms of closure of borders, we know that it's not all about everything, and even for the AfCFTA, it's not for all products as well. But importantly, what you mentioned is very critical. The local manufacturing sector are cringing and crying out for help. And more than that, also because of power, of course, the infrastructure. And the cost of doing business, is still huge, which will impact on the overall cost of products and services that have to compete, on the African continent. Favorably, of course, on the African, in the African market. So these are all things that need to be, considered. Like I said, it has to be a holistic approach to it. You talked about the tax leakages and all that as well. So there must be a strategy to reining in the benefits of being part of such a momentous, important platform. I think from another perspective, I would look at it as a catalyst to actually push for intermodal transportation execution in terms of the project execution, in terms of overall trade strategy. How do we quicken or fasten those requisite strategic positioning and actions to make us benefit from this? Otherwise, we may lose entirely, because don't forget, Nigeria is the biggest market. And even before this agreement is signed, for many years, Nigeria has actually been feeding the West Africa region with products and services. So it's not even just about products, even including services across the borders to Niger in the north, up to Mali. Here we have the corridor, Benin, Ghana, up to Sierra Leone, and the east you have Cameroon, up to Central Africa. These trades are happening informally. And what we are saying now, we are going to have a game changer that will probably restructure, recalibrate, upscale the quality of products and services, importantly, give more value to the traders and the countries. But how we are able to set up the structures and the systems in place for our traders to compete is what will be a critical success factor.
But do you think we can beat that before January the 1st, 2021?
I think we need to understand the timelines. I think the timelines between now and 2021 will be basically, like I said, addressing the protocol issues, the signing of the agreements and all that. I think the trade practice itself will be something that will be activated further down the line, because it's 54 countries now that have signed on, and all the baby steps in terms of documentations and all that, setting up the headquarters administratively and all that has to be done. While that is done, pari passu, countries are trying to, set up and see how they can key into the overall, overarching strategy for ASC. So I think for the baby step, the time, of course, is very short, looking at the entire year that have been bedeviled, by coronavirus pandemic. So it's going to be a fast-forward approach for us to even beat the deadline in terms of the documentation and, importantly, sensitization. But because I believe there needs to be a very big, sensitization strategy for the traders. And a lot of comforting as well, because we just saw now the traders in Ghana crying out for help to come back to Nigeria. When you juxtapose it to what we have now, it's not telling a very interesting story.
Let's also now talk about incentives. Now, looking at the performance of the services sector, Africa as a whole, we've seen no less than over 53% of Africa's GDP coming from the services sector. So we have to ensure that across the supply value chain as well, much more needs to be done. When we are talking about regional integration as well, we also have to look at the infrastructure they have across the different regions, the different units as well, and how do we bring all of this together? Now improving on our services, how do we work on eliminating tariffs? How do we present incentives that beat down the cost of doing business at this point in time? How do we make Nigeria much more competitive? When you look at the other markets, the Ghanaian market, the Togolese market, that of Benin Republic as well, these are still the go-to areas. They are the new hubs for maritime and other sectors. Aviation, Nigeria is the giant, yet still lags behind.
Because, like we mentioned, first of all, the infrastructural deficit is a critical issue. And then you have, you mentioned earlier, trade coherence. And here we have to also talk about policy coherence. We need to have these synergies and coherence in terms of policy conceptualization and implementation. A lot of this cost of doing business are either a function of overlapping or competing policies on the same trade element, for example, or in terms of execution itself. For example, if we use the airport, you go to the airport, instead of having the single window platform, and you have layers and layers of bottlenecks and overarching regulations that, otherwise should have been streamlined and made easy for ease of doing business. So the critical thing about ease of doing business is for the fundamentals of business to be as cheap and easy as possible for the producers, whether they are manufacturers or service providers. And when you talk about the cost, whether it is duplication, whether it's creation of bottlenecks, the government has to sit down and look at it holistically. How do we create wealth while we are still targeting transactional revenues? We should look at it from a strategic point of view.
But now, wrapping up our conversation at this point in time, we have to also look at innovative financing tools that we can explore. At this point in time, every single continent is re-strategizing on the blueprint, looking at the fact that we are having global economic meltdowns. There are individual elements also pulling down economies into very strong contraction levels, but we just have to fight through it all. Now, looking at public-private partnerships, we've not had the best foot being put forward in terms of Nigeria as a unit. But now, along the regional lines again, how do we go about this? And then also, let's talk about financing from the African Development Bank. We've seen the emergence of Dr. Akumi additional for a second term as well. With the AfCFTA now on the front burner, expecting to start a new window of opportunities, how much of a funding do you think we can pull and leverage on public-private partnerships?
Funding is a function of opportunities, viability, feasibility, and execution. So Africa Development Bank is a financial institution that is targeting to support growth, economic growth and development. But then bringing it back home, we have to do our homework. We have to get it right in terms of the fundamentals. I believe this is an opportunity for us to collapse the table and re-strategize entirely in terms of policy. Of course, we are not going to throw everything into the bin, but I believe it is time to review these strategies, for the benefit of the players. Otherwise, the fear of, for example, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria is what's going to happen. Then Nigeria will become the dumping ground. Of these opportunities.
We have to just continue working on the institutional frameworks that would help propel transparency, accountability, and also push the African agenda much more aggressively. We would want to see competitive policy directions that would favorably put Nigeria on a better footing. Thank you very much for your time on the show.
Thank you for having me,
It's
David.
been a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Speaking with you.
Likewise.
Well,